Jason, I know that you've been following this trial very closely. And of course, as a former law enforcement officer, what is your reaction to the verdict today? What are you feeling?
Well, I'm not surprised. I would say that before the trial began, I had some questions as to whether the prosecution would be able to effectively prove causation. I know there were others that had the same questions, but monitoring the trial, I think the prosecution did a very good job at laying out a very organized case that I think proved beyond a reasonable doubt causation, which was the issue that I had concern about. I do think that the video in this case was extraordinarily compelling. I know it was compelling for those who saw it on TV, and I'm sure it was compelling for jurors and weighed heavily in their decision-making process.
Well, and of course, George Floyd's brother made the case that no trial was necessary. The video told it all. I wonder about the role of police in the age of Black Lives Matter. In your view, how does policing need to change?
Well, I think policing should always change and evolve. And it is changing and evolving. I would point out that uses of force by police officers are rare. 99.9% of police encounters do not involve any use of force. 95% of police officers will go their entire career without discharging a firearm, and discharges of firearms over the last 50 years have decreased by 90%. So I think we're definitely headed in the right direction. I think we need to continue to improve our training, our recruitment and selection, improve our leadership capacities, our involvement in the communities. And I think all those things will take us to the right place. I don't think this one case is going to resolve the tension between police and many of the communities they serve. But I do think we're on the right path. And sometimes I question some of the skepticism around police today, because I think objectively police do a very difficult job, most often, vast majority of the cases, extremely well and professionally.
So how do you imagine that police across the country will react to this verdict, given what you just said there?
Yeah, this verdict will not come as a surprise to most law enforcement officers. I think many, if not most, law enforcement officers watched the video and were troubled by what they saw in the video. But officers also understand that everyone's entitled to due process. So I think the idea that Derek Chauvin, that there didn't need to be a trial just because there was a compelling video, is misplaced. I think we need to understand that a video is a piece of evidence. It can be compelling, but all police officers are entitled to due process. I don't think there'll be any negative reaction by police officers. I think they understand this verdict. There certainly will be some that will question issues like causation. Was it adequately proven? But I think on balance, this is a case that everyone understands this verdict.
So do you expect that there will be, I know you say you believe that police departments should always be evolving. Do you expect that this case in particular will lead to a cultural shift in policing across the country?
Cultural shifts are very difficult in policing in particular, because the culture in policing is unique and it is relatively strong. Some agencies have done a fantastic job at improving the culture without diminishing the profession itself, and others struggle. And one of the police departments that I worked at struggled with culture and continues to struggle with culture. I don't think this one case is going to do it, but I think continued smart ideas about how to improve policing, how to improve the policies they work under, how to improve, again, I'll say recruitment and selection of police officers and of leaders in police agencies is critical, and improve the accountability process. That over time is going to fix any cultural issues that exist in policing, any negative cultural issues that exist in policing. I don't think this one case is going to have a strong impact there. But I do think this is a reminder for everyone, whether you're a police officer or not, that our judicial system does work. And in this case, there were people who doubted it and didn't think it would work and thought that there would be, I don't know, something would happen where a jury would be afraid to convict a police officer. And that just didn't happen. So due process works, our system works. And I think to the extent that we can limit it, political interference in our system, I think we'll be better for it.
It's wonderful to hear that sense of optimism. You know, we were just talking to Andre Swanston earlier, who believes that, change will be difficult, change may not happen. And I'm curious, when you say, whether there are cultural issues, what do you think, if there are, as you said, negative cultural issues inside police forces, what are those issues?
Well, I think there's a hesitancy. I mean, I'm not going to deny that there is a hesitancy among police officers to report the misconduct of other police officers. That hesitancy does still exist. I think it is being overcome within law enforcement culturally. There are programs that are spreading around the country how to train officers to deal with those situations, how to intervene if they see another officer for any reason using what they think is excessive force, how they can prevent that force from continuing. And they're training you. Maybe you don't think that officers need to be trained how to do that, but they do have to be trained how to do that. There's a particular way to do it, and officers are being trained around the country how to do it. And I think that's a great thing. Most major police agencies are implementing that. I think that's an example of very positive change that was instigated from within law enforcement. It wasn't imposed from any outside third party, wasn't imposed by a lawsuit or anything else. It's being done by police for police, because it helps police officers as much as the communities they serve, for officers to make sure that they always stay in contact with the policies and the training that guide their performance.
Now, we know that police forces across the country were preparing for this moment in case of unrest, in case of a very strong emotional reaction, people flooding out onto the streets. Do you imagine that will still happen now that we know what the verdict is? Tell us what's happening inside these police departments right now.
Well, I'm sure every agency is going to maintain whatever their plan was. We don't know what the reaction will be. I see that just from watching the coverage here, that there is some celebration in various places across the country. I do expect that, and I expect that to continue. I know agencies are going to want to be careful, because there's going to be more people out in the street than is normal. There's always the risk that something bad can happen. I don't necessarily anticipate that, and I don't think they do either. But out of an abundance of caution, they'll maintain their current postures and just kind of wait and see what happens throughout the night.
What do you think is next, Jason, as somebody who's lived it on that side?
Well, I think probably the biggest exception that I find myself taking when I hear from perhaps people who are police misconduct activists is that I think each of these cases are unique, and they stand kind of in their own. The evidence of the case speaks for itself, and it's not transferable to other cases. And I think that's the fundamental difference in between how I and other people who are from a pro-law enforcement perspective see things. I would look at any of these other high-profile cases, and I might have an entirely different analysis for the case, because it's going to be based solely on the evidence of that case. So I'm not a person that thinks that police abuse and police misconduct is rampant. I do believe it exists. And I believe when it exists, it has to be rooted out, and it has to be dealt with due process for all involved. But I think it does have to be eradicated, and we should continue to work toward that. But where I take exception is I don't believe that it's an epidemic. I don't believe there's an epidemic of racial profiling or injustice by police officers. I think a lot of the perceptions that exist, they're generational, and they have existed over a long period of time, and they've been handed down through generations who've taught the next generation about what to look out for with police officers. And they're also compelling because sometimes the cases, these high-profile cases, come at us over and over again through the media, through social media, and through video images. And so they're very gripping, they're very compelling, and I think they perhaps project something beyond what they should, because they just are one case. So I think you asked me what is next, and I think what is next is that every police officer needs to look within him or herself and remember why they entered the profession, and continue to work toward the goal of professionalism, connecting with their communities, but also protecting their communities, and not shying away from taking enforcement action when it's appropriate. And I think most officers will do that. There is a real concern out there, I have to tell you, that some of the unfair treatment of police officers, or what is perceived by police officers being unfair, leads them to be afraid to take action when necessary. And I think that's a real danger for public safety.